All right, it's 11 o'clock. Good morning. I was supposed to have a doctor's appointment this morning, so I had the graduate assistant, our college graduate assistant, give my first exam in my professional sales class, which meant that I didn't have time to print off the roll because I have the roll sheets on the classroom computer up there, and I just print them off when I come in the morning and then bring them down. So there isn't a roll sheet for today, so I apologize for not getting that out there. If you didn't show up today, I guess you got a freebie. For those of you who didn't show up, I'm not going to count that as one of your absences since I am remiss in that. However, you will miss the big part of the syllabus where it says, note, today's material is not in the book. None of this is in the book. And students say things like, well, why should I know anything that's not in the book? Well, it's amazing what's in my head that's not in the book. So today's material is not in the book. And I did this specifically as a result of this lecture, as a result of sort of a request from or a couple of semesters ago, from a student who said, well, there's just not much about what you want for the article review on D2L. And I thought, well, really? There's really not much about what I want for the article review. If you go to the end of the syllabus or for the group project, there's this like wonderful thing called a rubric that tells you how I will grade the article review and the group project. And so it's broken down by categories, and then you have, points assigned to each of those categories. So I would suggest that you look at those rubrics to figure out exactly whether or not you've got all the portions of the article review or the group project that you will need to have your complete, submission evaluated, because these are basically the group project and the article review are the sort of real give me points in this class. If you don't do well on exams, there are 5 exams, these 2 grades will balance out at least 2 of the exams that you don't do so well on. The average score on the first exam was 61, so I thought it would be better because I had dropped it to 25. You had more time to answer all the questions. There were people that were struggling to get through 50. For those of you who got bonus points for the first exam, make sure that your score matches. So you should have gone through your exam that you could take and gone through with the key and looked what you got wrong. Did you all do that so that you can figure out whether or not the exam score that I posted is correct, whether it reconciles with what you think that you have. So please be sure and do that. But having said that I post this rubric and things, I thought, well, maybe students really don't know what it is to make a logical argument, and it's not necessarily a bad idea. So engaging in this idea of value co-creation, after the student said this to me, I thought, well, I'll do a presentation on what you should be doing in making arguments for these 2 things. Now, you can pick any topic in marketing that you want for your article review, and you can pick any topic that your group wants for your group presentation. If you have one person that really is passionate about their article review topic, it just has to be a topic in marketing. Marketing is a pervasive social activity, right? So almost everything you can turn into a marketing analysis. You can turn your lunch dates with your friends into a marketing analysis. How you persuade them to go eat the crappy food and buddies that they have from God only knows what source provider we're using this year for our cafeteria services. But you can analyze that from a marketing perspective. So almost anything that you can think of, you can use a marketing analysis on it. So go through sort of the topics of the book and look at those chapters and then try to figure out how your article, now most of you will choose business articles, but you don't have to. You can choose an article in the field of political marketing or nonprofit marketing or in societal marketing, that are just not just nonprofits, but social groups, social organizations that promote different kinds of causes. Neighborhood associations use marketing. So all of those things. So go through and then kind of figure out how you can analyze the article that you are interested in from that marketing perspective based on the topics, the substantive topics of the book. You may expand on one of your fellow students' article review. If you really like that topic, just be sure that you notice that the article review, there only has to be how many sources for it? How many of you bothered to look at the article review assignment and syllabus? I know I didn't go over the syllabus in here because I figured that you could read the syllabus. So you only, for the article review, you only have to have what? One source. Unless it's like this really short article and you're not going to be able to get 3 full pages of analysis in that. And I know what you'll do. I want 3 full pages, and the rubric is pretty specific on the font size and everything, because if I'm not, and I don't put in the margins, what will happen is you'll turn in, you know, this first page, you'll put your name, you'll do 2-inch margins on the top, the sides, and the bottom, and you'll choose this like 18-point font where you'll put your name, right? And my name, and your dog Fluffy's name, because Fluffy helped you edit, right? And then you'll start, so like 3 full pages of analysis. If you can't get 3 pages of analysis, you're going to have to do more than 1 article. If you can't, but I could get 3 pages full of analysis out of, you know, a very short article just by going through the topics in the book and sort of analyzing it from those perspectives. But if you can't, you may need 2 articles to get to the 3 full pages. You have to have more sources for the group project. So you're welcome to use a topic that you've chosen. So for example, one that might be really fascinating, what's just happened in the world of space exploration. Space, yeah, Elon Musk launched his Tesla. This is really remarkable that we now have private companies that are engaging. We can no longer, as a nation, send a man into space. We have to catch rides with the Russians. It is the first time in human history that we have regressed, technologically speaking. When we ended the space shuttle program and didn't have something to replace it, we are no longer capable. We are having to use the Russians to send people into space. And we've also regressed in aerospace in another way. You can no longer fly from New York to London or New York to Paris on a supersonic jet because the Concorde, they just ended the program. And so this is a huge deal. That private industry is now launching stuff, and not only did they launch, how many of you watched this remarkable thing? It's not just that he launched it, and they said, what's the chances of success? He said 50-50. And then he said, well, maybe 60-40. And not only did they launch it, but what happens that's really remarkable? The side rockets actually came back down and were where they thought they would be. In the past, when we've done this, what's happened to the rockets? One use, single use. So this is really remarkable, and it's being done by private industry. And so you could think that's a great article, and somebody could do that, and you might want to do that for your group project. You're just going to have more than the total sources that you'll have to have for the article review. So be sure and pay attention to that. Now, having said that, how are you going to argue? There is a way that academics write, and my mother, who was an English teacher, says, Grant, your writing is uninspired, and that's true. It starts with an introduction that should have something that resembles a thesis statement, which is an argument, and then you have substantive analyses, followed by a well-reasoned conclusion. There should be a connection between these things that we call a nexus. You should have learned how to write this way in what? You should have learned to write this way in your sophomore English class in high school. I don't know what they teach in high school anymore. I was concerned. I made a reference to 1984 the other day, and one of my students had no idea what 1984 was. And I said, well, what did you read in literature class in high school? She said, well, I took American literature. And I said, oh, okay, well, what did you read? well, we read Jackie Collins novels. Well, there's two problems with that. A, they're trash, and B, she's not an American. Like, American literature should be by what? American authors. So I'm a little concerned at times, so I'm going through this as this is the way that you should write. I had a student that wrote on an exam one time, I think I may have told you this before, I approached this problem eager as a squirrel in an oak forest, when wham bam, the answer came to me like an elephant in a circus tumbling routine, and I wrote back, I leapt like a gazelle to the conclusion, you deserve an F for making me read this drivel, and you need to go take a creative writing course to get this out of your system. So don't do that. I mean, this is the sort of structure that I'm looking for in these things. Now, how do we get there? How are we going to make this logical connection, this nexus between these points, between your thesis and those substantive examples? What is that connection? Well, we're going to use logic and critical thinking to make these arguments. For 5 points, have I asked you this question before? If I have, redundancy is good, and whoever gives me the answer first gets 5 points. For the next exam, what does the word apocryphal mean? You can get out your cell phones. Yes. What does the word apocryphal mean? Of doubtful authenticity or... Okay, although widely circulated is true, what might we call this in layman's terms? Misconception? Okay. How about urban legend? Does that sound like it meets the definition of apocryphal? Urban legend. Who is W for 5 points? Who is W.C. Fields? Yes. Okay, very good. He was an American comedian. He's a big fat guy. He died when? He died in 1946. So how do I even know? Because I obviously was not born in 1946. How do I even know about this guy? Well, I used to watch a lot of old television before there were 83 million channels with absolutely nothing on them to watch. You know, there were some sort of good reruns, and W.C. Fields was one of these popular comedians out there. There's an apocryphal story about W.C. Fields that says that he was stumbling out of the bar in Los Angeles one early morning, and a woman approached him and said, "Mr. Fields, you're a drunk." And he said, "Yes, madam, but you're ugly, and in the morning I will be sober." Is that an argument? No, it's not an argument. So for 10 points, what is an argument and what does it mean? Not just from some definition that you found on the internet. Give me the definition and then tell me what it actually means, what that means. Yes?
It's an exchange of diverging or opposite views, typically a heated or angry one, but it's also something that you can prove.
Okay, so it says typically heated or angry. So in this example with W.C. Fields, there may be angry words. If I call you fat and ugly, you might not like me, right? And that may lead to fisticuffs, couldn't it? Perhaps. That's a rather old-fashioned term for fighting, right? So it could lead to bad results, but it's technically not an argument. Now, it may be heated. Some arguments may be heated, but they don't have to be. And students tell me all the times, I just don't like arguing. I don't want to go to law school like you did because I'm just not confrontational. But is argument about necessarily confrontation and fighting? No, you're shaking your head no. Why?
Because it's used as a conversation tool between people to put their point, to get their point across, to help persuade people to their opinion.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The best form of arguments are persuading people to believe something that you hold true or that you want them to accept as true. And implicitly, what are we doing in marketing when we put our products out there? We're making an argument that you should buy our product if you have the need for this product. When Canon, I think it's Canon, Vioxx, developed this camera, they were putting a product out there, and there is an implicit argument that someone needs this. Turns out I needed it so that I could put my lectures online, because I have a narcissistic personality disorder and I like to hear my own voice. And so I'm enamored with this, and so I needed a camera. And their argument's going to be, you should buy our camera. There are lots of other camera companies out there that make cameras. Who else makes cameras that I could have? Nikon, Canon. This is a Canon. What? Sony makes cameras. I could have used what? I could have used the camera on my iPhone, couldn't I? You can use this camera. Why did I want that camera? So I could also use my phone. It's easy to record with. If I start running out of space on the camera, it will stream live to the phone and I can store it on my phone. And as a result of this, I can actually stream it from the phone directly up to YouTube and load it into YouTube that way if I want to. So they're making an argument implicitly by putting their product out there that you should buy our product. It's going to satisfy a need or a want that you have. So we're using these constantly in marketing, whether we think about it or not. Now, the thing that's important about this is that we oftentimes don't think about it, and we make arguments poorly. And it may be one of the biggest reasons why 95% of business startups fail within the first 5 years of going into business. Because they just don't understand the arguments that they need to make, maybe to get customers or constituents. Maybe they don't understand the argument that they should be making within their own company about what should we be doing. And so I find that people do this poorly, and they don't understand the rules. Now, you could take an entire course in logic and critical thinking. We offer courses. If you walk across the parking lot to Hippy Dippy over there, they offer a course called Intro to Logic and Critical Thinking, and you'll learn all about Boolean logic and things like that are well beyond the scope of this course. So what I want to do is provide you with a foundation so that you can use this to make an argument in your papers for this class, and then ultimately to go out and market yourself and say, these are the reasons you should hire me to be your next salesperson or your next accountant or your next finance guy, whatever it is that you all want to do after you leave here, after you've gotten the bachelor's degree, and you go out and say, I'm educated, I have this career from UCO, or this certificate or degree from UCO that says I am going to be a good career choice for you to make. So there are a couple things that we have to think about. Valid and invalid. We use words in many instances and we think they mean the same thing, and they don't. Valid and invalid and true and false are not the same things, although a lot of times people pretend that they are. Valid and invalid go to the structure of an argument, whether or not there's a structure to the argument. You can have a validly structured argument that turns out it's not true. Or you can have an invalid structure in your argument that happens to be true. Ideally, what you want is what? Valid and true. That's what you would like, ultimately. I give you a very simple example here. If it rains, the streets get wet. It rained, therefore the streets are wet. Very simple. This is a validly structured deductive argument of the form modus ponens, which means the mode of putting. If it rains, the streets get wet. It rained, therefore the streets are wet. If I said that today, this is a validly structured argument. It doesn't deny the antecedent or affirm the consequent. But if I said it today, would it be true? No. Any rain in the forecast today? Any precipitation in the Oklahoma City area predicted for today? No, there's not. It would not be true. Let's take one that applies to a marketing example. If you want to have a chance at success, you should get a degree in professional sales. You get a degree in professional sales. Therefore, you have a chance at professional success. Now, let's say we made the same argument. If you want to have a chance at success, you should get a degree in musical theater. You get a degree in musical theater, therefore you have a chance at career success. Probably not true, right? The first one is true and it's a valid structure. The second one is validly structured and probably not true. We have lots of students here who get degrees in musical theater and they're asking people, would you like, fries with that order? Or, they're still the barista at Starbucks, which is the tool of the devil, or whatever it is, with their degree in musical theater. So you want both valid and true. You want to avoid the logical fallacies. So structure of the argument is important. A lot of what you will be arguing in these papers is going to be predicated on ideas that are inherently deductive in nature. And so there are a number of deductive structures that are valid. There's a rather pithy little book that you can buy if you're really interested in this called A Rule Book for Arguments by Anthony Weston. And you can pick it up for about $3 or $4. If you take my marketing ethics class, you have to buy it. So here's an example of one that's not structured well. That may be true. If it rains, the streets get wet. It did not rain, therefore the streets are not wet. This is called denying the antecedent. If you want a chance of success in your career, you should go into professional sales. You did not get success, therefore you did not go into professional sales. What's wrong with that? Why is denying the antecedent? So this part of the sentence is called the antecedent, and this part is called the consequent. Why is that structure not valid?
Because you could have gotten a career or a degree in professional sales and just be very poor salesman.
Yeah, you could be one of these people that is just not good at selling. Is sales a skill or is it a trait? The sales textbooks all say that it's a skill that you can learn, but if you are one of these people that has agoraphobia, what's agoraphobia? Afraid to leave the house, you get 5 points. Afraid to leave the house, you're afraid of people, are you going to be good at selling? Probably not. It's going to be difficult to do. And so you could do this and still not have a success. What is the problem? What's the biggest problem with denying the antecedent? Well, the two biggest logical fallacies are overlooking alternatives, which are you could get a degree in professional sales and not achieve a high degree of financial success because you have agoraphobia, or you're a drunk, or you're a drug addict, or any other number of things. It overlooks the alternatives, or assuming causation too readily by mere succession in time. So you should distinguish between premise and conclusions. So this is one that I used to use when I used to teach over in Hippy Dippy, and I used to teach Intro to Philosophy, actually. And I like this example, but I'll give you a marketing example as well. And you see marketers do this. It's called petito principe, or begging the question, or circular reasoning. This is the one that I like the most because I've had students actually make this argument with me. One of the reasons that I was interested particularly in philosophy was because I, as a younger person, was very concerned about my own immortality. I think a lot of young people are. And so I wanted to know if there was a really good argument for the existence of God, and it turns out that there really aren't any really good arguments for the existence of God. But one that you hear frequently is one that is relied on the circular reasoning, which is the Bible is the Word of God who wrote it. The Bible says that God exists, therefore God exists. You are implicitly assuming as your thesis, you're relying on your thesis and conclusion parts of premises. And you can't do that. That's an invalid argument. If you want to be happy, you should buy a Canon Vioxx camera. Canon says they're the best, therefore Canon Vioxx cameras are the best, and you'll be happy if you buy one. And we see marketers doing this all the time, just sort of implicitly, like, if you build it, they will come, right? Maybe not. Maybe that's not. So this is the example of the circular reasoning. You should avoid that. There should be, between this and this, they should look oddly similar, but the things in the middle need to be different, but connected. Rule number 3, order. Present your ideas in a natural order. Now, with regard to this rule, there is no a priori theoretical basis as to what would be the best order. I give you some examples. If you are presenting a historical argument, you're probably going to want to put it in what? Chronological order. However, most of our arguments in marketing, are they historical? No, they're really not. Why not? Because it's new. If we're relying on, the history of cameras to tell you whether or not you should buy that camera, we're probably going to miss the mark, aren't we? Because that camera is radically different. How many of you have seen rather old cameras in the movies where they actually had to manually take off the lens cover to get enough light onto the film, right? To expose it. That's not what we're doing today. So one of the things that may be beneficial in making arguments in marketing, and one of the things that we know, so for example, I have a consulting firm with a colleague of mine who is a hospitality professor, and we do field tests for various companies over whether or not people will like their product trial. One of the ones that we did here at UCO that was actually kind of fun for my students to participate in was a yogurt study for green leaf yogurt to determine whether or not people preferred green leaf to other varieties of yogurt. And one of the things that we know about is that people have a tendency to, in taste tests, for example, like the first one. So you can't do, what would be wrong with doing like, we're going to do a taste test between orange leaf and we're going to use their vanilla and somebody else's chocolate and somebody else's strawberry. Well, those are 3 different flavors. You're going to have a problem there. But if you don't switch the order up in the field tests, people have a tendency to like the first ice cream or the first bite of frozen yogurt the best. That's the one that they remember the most when you start asking them questions about it. Why is that? Well, there are a number of factors that play into this. First of all, it's the one where your palate is probably the most receptive to getting the full flavor. After you have taken a bite, and there are people that as a result of knowing this, they go to great lengths. There are people that have great jobs. One of the best jobs I can think of in the whole wide world would be to be a beer tester for Anheuser-Busch. I love beer. People do this. They have beer testers, and they have, very special ways. They ensure their nose and mouth and tongue through Lloyd's of London, because if they, were something were to happen to those olfactory, they wouldn't be able to test beer. I think this would be a great job. Other people might want to have a job taste testing ice cream. So they do things like they don't eat certain types. If you want to have this job, it actually turns out it may not be the greatest job in the world because you can't eat that. You can't smoke. You can't drink if you want to be an ice cream tester. And they use a gold spoon to test it. So there are these things that can influence. So you have to switch up the order. Now, as the marketer, knowing that, if you're presenting the product's features, maybe what you want to do in making your argument is what? Well, it's what they call in journalism the inverted pyramid. And the idea is that you put it first, your strongest argument first. Why? And they do this in journalism. When they write stories, they put the biggest part of the story first. Why is that?
Sets the tone of impression for the rest.
Yeah, and people stop reading after. I mean, one of the things that we know, particularly in an age in which we're all totally addicted to these devices that go off constantly in our hands and that we want really short bursts of information, people have a tendency to stop reading after what? The first paragraph. And so you want to summarize everything in the tagline, if you can. Bush declares war in Iraq. That tells you pretty much all you need to know, right? In the first sentence there, in the tagline. So you might want to put that first. There's also something called the recency effect, which is that people have a tendency to remember the last thing that they heard. So you might want to consider that. So there isn't an a priori theoretical way of doing this, but just think about how it structures in a natural sort of order or progression from one thing to another in making your arguments. Avoid emotionally charged language. Now, unfortunately, this is the one that we see used the most by marketers in advertising. And it's one of the ones where, again, all of this stuff sort of is connected that may be the most ethically problematic. Avoid emotionally charged language. Let's look at an ad. Now, it's not that this may not be effective. Probably is effective, but it's not the most ethical or logical way.
In an increasingly dangerous world, even after the first terrorist attack on America, John Kerry and the Liberals in Congress voted to slash America's intelligence operations by $6 billion. Cuts so deep they would have weakened America's defenses. And weakness attracts those who are waiting to do America harm.
I'm George W. Bush, and I approve this message.
So you want to avoid that. Now, it's not that it's not necessarily effective. American society is filled with hope and fear, and you may get people. The problem is that when you use it, it can be deceitful, and over the long term, people eventually figure it out. What happened to the Republican Party after George W. Bush? Why did Barack Obama win the White House? In spite of the fact that the Republicans were waving the bloody shirt, still maintaining that the Democrats were going to be awful for the country. Well, people were tired of it. After 8 years of Barack Obama, they were tired of what? Hearing about health care, and they were interested in other things, like building a wall and making America great. So, if you don't really focus in and think about this, and if marketers use and they rely on emotionally charged language, over the long term, I would argue that what happens is it decreases your ability to really engage in customer lifetime value. So you want to try and avoid that, and particularly in these two papers. Use consistent terms. I find that marketers do this all the time. They use this, because we think that variety is the spice of life, you should say things differently. The truth of the matter is there's something in marketing called the 3 exposure hypothesis, which says that before people are ready to really consider adopting a new product, they have to be exposed to it 3 times. If you use inconsistent terms in that exposure in your integrated, and we will talk about this, integrated marketing communication, what ends up happening is you muddle your message. And they may never accept it. And so you want to use consistent terms in your messaging. And that's one of the things that we'll talk a lot about with regard to integrated marketing communication. Stick to one meaning for each term. There's an example, there was a text that was written several years ago that became wildly popular, one of the best sellers, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and it basically was one of those sort of hollow truisms that we all know, that there are differences, that maybe we do think differently. I don't know that it's so much based on gender as maybe it is more socio-cultural influences that produce this, but it relies, a lot of the book relied on, and marketers in using things like this book, which was, by the way, written by a guy who had a fake PhD, relied upon the fallacy of equivocation. Equivocating 2 things as being equal when they're not. And so you want to avoid doing that in marketing. Don't equivocate. Stick to one meaning for each term. Be consistent. We use this a lot in marketing as well. We use samples to determine whether or not a product or a launch will be successful. And we make recommendations based on those samples. Now, it's important that as marketers we think about, and as you think about the articles that you'll get, a lot of them in business will make arguments about, for example, why a product or product launch was successful or wasn't, or why the economy is going up or it's going down. What's happened to the stock market in the past week? It's dropped. It's been highly volatile over the last week. Why is that? You think that's what? You think it's because of the memos? Why else would the stock market drop? Anybody else have? Yes.
There was an SEC hearing. They're saying behind me, Janet Ellen left.
Yeah. The Fed chair, not the SEC chair, the Fed chair, Janet Yellen, was replaced by a Trump appointee. They're suspects that they're going to raise interest rates, which generally has a negative impact on the stock market. But is that the only thing that could have an impact on it? Well, the economy is enormously complex. And when you start talking about samples of things, what we have to do is we have to make sure that the samples are representative. One of the things that we see people do a lot is they do sampling, for example, here in research on students. And are students a very good example or sample of the rest of the population? No, you're a horrible sample of the rest of the population. If I wanted to know whether or not the next governor was going to be Democrat or Republican in Oklahoma, for example, in a political marketing sample, and I did a bunch of students, I'm probably not going to get a very good sample and be able to predict whether or not in a political marketplace the Republican or Democrat Party was going to be successful. Why is that? Students are overwhelmingly, by virtue of the fact that you are sitting in these seats and are a sophomore or better, you are among the educational elite of this state. By virtue of just coming here, you are among the educational elite. And in a world context, you certainly are. So you're not representative of the rest of the state, which encompasses places like what? Miami, Gotebo, Guyman, Clinton. God help you if you live in Clinton. Sorry if it's on there. Edmond, Oklahoma City. No amount of anecdotal evidence will constitute a scientific sample. So if you want to make sure that you're going to make good business recommendations, you got to make sure. And so as you're evaluating these articles, a lot of students will do articles that involve some kind of argument being made based on a sample population. You have to make sure that it's not just what we would call a convenience sample. Convenience samples are just basically large amounts of anecdotal evidence. Analogy. We see these being used all the time in marketing as well. And here the important rule is that it has to be proportional. The analogy has to fit. Now you see this all the time when you go shopping. When you go, if you look at the brand of mouthwash, how many of you use Listerine, or Scope, or what are some of the others? Crest. How many of you buy the Walmart, great value brand? I buy, and it says on the package what? Compared to. This is an analogy, and it's an acceptable form of using anecdotal evidence because the analogy and the ingredients are what? They're the same. What's the difference between the great value or best choice variety of Walmart or Homeland or Cash Saver Listerine? What's the difference between their store label, which is not a generic, by the way, and the original that makes that analogy acceptable? Are they exactly the same? The active ingredients are the same. What's probably different in them?
There's probably usually in there, there's more water or something that the actual, the last ingredient is listed on the thing is probably different, but the main part.
The effect is going to be the same. The main ingredient is going to be the same. Maybe they use a cheaper version of green dye number 30, or whatever the current color is for the sort of aqua green Listerine color stuff that they have. Or they use slightly more of a type of flavoring in it that's different, but the active ingredient is going to be virtually the same. So you can get 5 points since you answered that question. Be sure to come up and see me. Citation is important. The way you're going to do this in yours is you're going to provide me copies with the thing. Now the way you should do it is just give me, it says on the thing, I wrote the rules for the article review and the group project when people actually still turn in things, a hard copy, and I wanted you to give me a hard copy of the article. You can just give me the URL, because I imagine that most of you are just going to go, you've probably never seen the inside of the UCO library. You're not going to go over there, you're not going to find a newspaper and read the article. Just provide me the URL and make sure that you list that either at the end of the document or you can put it into the, where you can put memos before you attach documents into the Dropbox. Authorities have to be qualified. What does this mean? Are all PhDs the same? No. During the 1980s, late 70s and 1980s, there were companies called Philip Morris among them and others that actually engaged people with PhDs in science to try and prove that there was no direct link or causation between smoking and cancer. There was a movie that was made about this that was actually fictionalized but largely true called Thank You for Smoking. How many of you have seen that movie? Anybody? It's not just the smoking industry that did it. The gun lobby also did it to try and prove that there's no, correlation between households that own guns and people that have guns used against them and things like that. And so they had all of these experts in there. Turns out that some of them, particularly with regard to smoking, We're not experts in like public health or in biology. And so the fact that you have a PhD doesn't mean that you're qualified. So you have to be qualified in the field in which you are making the argument. Ad hominem attacks don't disqualify a source, by the way. And an ad hominem attack is what?
When you attack a person and not their argument.
A person and not their argument, yeah. And you can get 5 points for that. Correlation. 2 correlated events does not equal causation. It turns out that the #1 predictor of whether or not a family in India engages in family planning and has therefore fewer children is directly correlated to the number of electronic devices that they have in their home. If you run a Pearson correlation on the number of electronic devices in a home and the number of children that are in that home, there's a direct correlation in the R-square value, even among the adjusted R-square. How many of you have had statistics? So you should know something about Pearson correlation, right? So from that study, we can conclude that electronic devices lead to infertility, can't we? Cell phones lead to infertility. Isn't that what that tells us? Yes or no? Toaster ovens. Watch out for the toaster oven. The microwave. What's going on there?
Less people need less things.
Less people need less things? No, they have more things. The less number of people, they have more things.
They have more money.
They have more money. And if you have more money, you have more what? You have more education, generally. And education is the #1 predictor of family planning in developing nations. So 2 events may have a common cause. Correlation doesn't equal causation. Avoiding complex questions. I've showed you that an example of a double-barreled question about human relations and development. You should avoid those. You should avoid making arguments with them. Forcing commitment on secondary tangential issues that are not related to the main topic. That's called the red herring. Are there any questions about logic and critical thinking? All right, so I plan on giving you time to click class to work in your groups. If you want to start thinking about your group project, you have about 30 minutes left in class. Or you can go and use this time to start thinking about or looking for articles. And if you have questions, you're welcome to always text me or call me, and I'll be happy to respond. If you feel cheated because I'm giving you a little bit of break and you just want to go out and enjoy the now somewhat nicer weather than we've had in the last couple of days, and you feel cheated by that, you let me know and we'll stay late on Tuesday. Yes, sir. All right. I don't know what's in the syllabus. I can look, hold on. I have a tendency not to remember due dates as mine. March 6th? Make sure I've got that. Yeah. Yep. It's there's a group project work day. And an article review is due on submission to 2 hours.